Welcome to the channel, and in this video I'll be going over Stephen King adaptations that I own. There's been a lot made over the years and I own quite a few of them. I picked out 8 from my collection, so let's get into the video. First up is Brian De Palma's adaptation of Carrie from 1976, which from my research was the first adaptation of Stephen King's work, and it really established De Palma as a director who went on to have a pretty great career. Screen Factory put out this 4K steelbook back in 2022, and it was an upgrade for me. I had their previous Blu-ray, but I double dipped on the 4K because it was on sale. They didn't add any new special features, but the previous release was already pretty loaded with bonus features. It's definitely the definitive version of this classic film. I've never bothered watching the sequel, or the TV remake, or the remake from 2013, because this film still remains pretty timeless. You can't top what De Palma did, and the themes still remain relevant to today. So adding a modern setting or updating it for today's teens just feels unnecessary to me. It's also an Oscar-nominated film, which horror movies always tend to get overlooked when it comes to award consideration. Definitely check out this film if you haven't, or if it's been a while, give it a rewatch because it still holds up. Next is the first entry in a franchise that has a total of 11 films, and 2 of them being remakes actually. The first Children of the Corn was released back in 1984 and was a small independent production trying to capitalize off the prior successes of Stephen King's work. It certainly paid off despite critics not liking it. Arrow Video put this out on Blu-ray in 2017, and that was my first time watching it, or at least watching it from start to finish, and I actually really enjoyed this movie. It has a great setting, and the kids are actually pretty creepy, in particular Isaac and Malachi. The opening scene is great when the kids attack the restaurant, and I like that they had the restraint to not show He Who Walks Behind the Rose. Well, until the climax where they had that very dated visual effect, and I would say it was even dated even back then in 1984. This is a great release that has tons of bonus features, including an interview with Linda Hamilton. Arrow would put this out again in 4K in 2022. I also bought the UMD for this a few years ago. Anchor Bay put this out way back when, and it's a good movie to watch on the go. It's a pretty breezy watch with its 90-minute runtime. It would be a good watch if you're making your way through Middle America. There weren't many Stephen King adaptations put out for the PSP, unfortunately. This one wasn't particularly hard to find either, but definitely cool to have in the collection. Next is from 1983, The Dead Zone. It was directed by one of my favorite directors, David Cronenberg. This is less of a horror movie and more of a thriller. Screen Factory put out this collector's edition in 2021, and it was a first-time watch for me. Christopher Walken plays a guy who wakes up from a coma, and now he has psychic abilities. He uses his newfound powers for good, and then he meets Martin Sheen's senator character, and he has this dilemma, like does he kill Martin Sheen now before he commits atrocities years down the line? I won't spoil it, but the climax was very well done. This Blu-ray is also pretty packed with special features, and it ports over all the previous bonus features as well. Sadly, no new interviews with Walken, or Cronenberg, or Martin Sheen. This film doesn't get talked about enough. King has a lot of great films made based on his work, and this one is up there with the greats. Definitely give this one a watch if you haven't seen it before. Screen Factory also recently released this on 4K as well. Next is the 1980 classic The Shining. I just have this basic Blu-ray of it, and someday I'll upgrade it. I wasn't really a fan of the artwork that Warner Brothers did for its recent 4K release. I don't know why the major studios continue to put out subpar artwork for their releases. I mean, I'd rather at least have the original poster art. Anyway, this movie is a classic and a must-watch for horror fans. I saw this movie at a pretty young age at a friend's sleepover, and I couldn't sleep, so I called my mom to come pick me up. I ended up staying away from horror movies for years after that. It's also one of those movies where the making of the movie is just as interesting as the film itself. Stephen King famously hated this film, but seems like he's come around on it over the years. Next is the sequel to The Shining, Dr. Sleep. Mike Flanagan did a great job with this film, and I never would have thought a sequel to The Shining would actually be any good. I bought this steelbook day one from Best Buy, and it came with the director's cut of the movie, which I'm still yet to watch. It's about 30 minutes longer, giving it a 3-hour runtime. I like that Flanagan went with actors who look similar to Shelley Duvall, Scatman Crothers, and Jack Nicholson, instead of just using CGI. A recent movie that I saw in theaters used CGI to de-age an actor, and it was pretty distracting every time that character was on screen. If you've seen the director's cut, let me know how it is, but if you were skeptical of this movie, it's definitely worth your time. Next is the only film that Stephen King directed, 1986's Maximum Overdrive. It's another killer car movie, but definitely nowhere near as good as Christine. This movie, I would say, is so bad that it's just entertaining. I think what most people remember about this movie is the Green Goblin semi-truck. Apparently, Stephen King was coked out of his mind while making this movie, and he stated that he was in way over his head, and it definitely shows for sure. It's one of those movies you watch with a few friends and you just enjoy the absurdity and the mayhem of the movie. Vestron Video put this out on Blu-ray in 2018 and packed it with tons of new bonus features. It's worth a watch or even picking up for your collection. Next is the werewolf movie from 1985, Silver Bullet. Scream Factory put out this collector's edition in 2019, and this was a blind buy for me. The artwork from Devin Whitehead really sold me on the movie, and I actually wound up really enjoying this movie. It feels very Stephen King, but also has that Spielberg, Amblin Entertainment feel to it. It's the second best movie starring Corey Haim, with the first obviously being The Lost Boys. Also, it's probably one of the few movies where Gary Busey didn't play a bad guy, but he's still eccentric as always. Like any werewolf movie, it has one really cool transformation scene that sees all the townspeople starting to turn into werewolves, but the one knock on the movie is the actual werewolf suit itself. In the special features, they do talk about the difficulties they had when bringing the werewolf to life. Also in the special features, Everett McGill revealed that he actually wore the werewolf suit when typically the monster would be played by a stunt person. We're pretty starved of new werewolf movies today, so if you're ever in the mood to watch one, this is one you can't go wrong with. The last movie in this video is 1992's Sleepwalkers, and just like Silver Bullet, what sold me on this movie was Devin Whitehead's artwork. Scream Factory released this in 2018, and this movie wasn't based on a Stephen King story actually. Instead, Stephen King just wrote the screenplay for it, and it was directed by Mick Garris, who went on to direct the TV miniseries of both The Stand and The Shining. This movie's tone is all over the place, because you have scenes that are very goofy and are played very broad, and then there's the weird incestual relationship with the mom and the son, who are like these feline vampires whose weaknesses are cats. And then there's the teen melodrama, because it's also a coming-of-age movie as well. So the tone changes from scene to scene, and I kind of admire it for that. They added over an hour of new special features with new interviews with Mick Garris and the principal actors. I don't know if I could recommend this to everyone, but if you like what you hear, then by all means check this out. Thank you for watching part 1 in this series. Stephen King is a pretty prolific writer that's had a lot of films adapt his work, so part 2 will drop in the near future, but until then, have a movie time.